What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Miss Marple, and murder at Rosewood Gate, hit me up. What made you smile today, and where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready. Because nothing in Whispers in the Fog is ever what it seems. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Dreadful Discovery at Rosewood Gate. The rain fell in relentless sheets, obscuring the quaint little village of St. Mary Mead. Wind whipped through the narrow streets, sending shivers coursing through the slender branches of the ancient oak trees, lining the roads. It was one of those dreary nights that turned shadows into harbingers of misfortune, a night unfurling its damp curtain over what would soon be an unspeakable tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, the village's most intrepid amateur sleuth, had settled by her cozy fireplace that evening, her knitting needles clicking away rhythmically. The ticking of the old grandfather clock lent a haunting cadence to the atmosphere, and outside, the sound of rushing water filled the air as rain cascaded down from the rooftops. She had nearly completed a rather extravagant scarf when a loud knock at her door interrupted the quietude. Miss Marple, startled, rose from her chair and walked slowly to answer, her senses keenly aware of the peculiar tension that sparked in the air. Upon opening the door, she was confronted by a drenched figure, the flickering lantern light barely illuminating the frantic expression etched upon the face of George Pritchard, the local baker. "Miss Marple, you must come quickly to Rosewood Gate," he gasped, eyes wide with a fear that sent a prickling chill through her. "What on earth has happened?" she asked, anxious to ascertain the situation while glancing at the rain pattering against her window like urgent whispers from the night. "It's Mrs. Stokes," George stammered, hardly able to contain himself. "They found her at Rosewood Gate." The very name filled Miss Marple with a sense of foreboding. Mrs. Stokes, the reclusive widow, living at the decaying manor on the outskirts of the village, had often been a subject of gossip. Her peculiarities had fostered intrigue, whispered tales of bitterness and loss at the heart of her creaking manor. "Lead the way," Miss Marple commanded, her mind already racing with visions of what awaited. The two hurried through the rain, the downpour drenching them to the bone as they traversed the dark path leading to the imposing structure of Rosewood Gate. The loud creak of the gate seemed to echo her very thoughts, a premonition of what was to come. As they approached, the drearier aspects of the manor loomed larger, the broken windows and ivy crawling up its walls like slow-consuming fingers. A gathering of villagers had assembled in a nervous cluster at the doorstep, all eyes turned expectantly toward Miss Marple as she arrived. "Thank goodness you're here, Miss Marple," she heard Mrs. Pritchard, George's wife, murmur, fear mingling with admiration. She's inside." With a steady resolve, Miss Marple pushed through the crowd. Inside, the flickering lights cast eerie shadows across intricately woven carpets adorned with moth-eaten patterns. The air was thick, laden with an uncanny stillness that barely masked the horror of the scene before her. They found Mrs. Stokes in the dimly lit drawing room, lifeless against the cold marble floor, a series of strange symbols scrawled around her in dark ink. It was the kind of drawing that a fevered artist might create in a moment of madness, a desperate plea perhaps, or a cryptic final message. The villagers recoiled, murmurs rising like a startled flock of birds. "Miss Marple, do you think it was an accident?" came a voice from the crowd, laced with dread. Miss Marple leaned closer, studying the symbols intricately woven together. "No, I am afraid not," she replied, her voice a calm oasis amidst the turmoil. Each stroke of ink seemed deliberate, and the position of Mrs. Stokes, slumped lifelessly across the hearth, spoke volumes. "What do you mean, miss?" George inquired, his brow furrowed in confusion. Mrs. Stokes was not simply unwell, she stated, her gaze drifting toward the open window through which a cool breeze flowed, chilling the room even further. She wanted the world to see her message. But why? And was this her doing? Or someone else? The ink, it's fresh. If we wish to piece together this puzzle, we need to discover who had access to her in these last hours. Panic spread among the villagers, eyes darting nervously. Tattered secrets floated on the edge of their lips, eager to be unfurled. Mrs. Stokes was a lady of many mysteries, one enveloped in shadows and whispers. Miss Marple observed them all, how they averted their gazes, the twitch of a jaw, the quiver of a finger, all telling tales of their entwined histories with the deceased. Had anyone called upon her today? Miss Marple inquired of her audience, expecting the answers she knew were already buried in layers of gossip that resided in this village. Mrs. Pritchard's voice broke through the murmurs. "Why, yes," she stuttered. "Young Timmy, the postman, he delivered a letter just hours ago." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Do you recall what that letter contained?" she pressed, every fibre of her being focused on the clues slowly unravelling. The villagers exchanged wary glances, but George Pritchard quickly jumped in. He mentioned it was from London, something about her past. A past she wanted to keep buried, Miss Marple mused, her sharp mind drawing connections. And it may have led to her demise. We must find Timmy. He may hold the key. She stood, feeling the sense of urgency wash over her as everyone rushed to restore their composure. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from the back of the manor. The group all turned, the tension electrifying, as if the very air had thickened with dread. Without hesitation, Miss Marple headed for the sound, her pace quickening as she sensed the growing darkness not just outside, but within Rosewood Gate itself. There, in the dim light, a shadow fled through a rear door, leaving a trail of ominous wet footprints leading deeper into the heart of the manor. Miss Marple drew in a breath, her heart racing not just from fright, but from exhilaration. The chase had begun. "Stay alert," she called, back, determinedly pursuing the intruder. A reckoning awaited, but it was still hidden in the storm of secrets that had taken root in this forsaken house, waiting to be unveiled. Chapter 2. The Guests of Glimmering Intent. The rain beat a relentless tattoo on the slate roof of Allendale Manor, each drop a somber note in a chilling symphony of nature's wrath. Miss Jane Marple peered out through the grand, draped window, her keen eyes surveying the tempestuous night sky. She had come to the manor, nestled in the heart of the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, for a quiet weekend. But the atmosphere crackled with an unspoken tension. The invitation had promised an evening of charming discourse among friends. Instead, the air tasted of foreboding. As the clock chimed 8, a sudden shriek broke through the rolling thunder. Miss Marple turned sharply, the dignified veneer of a quiet old lady slipping momentarily. Two of her fellow guests, Emily Fortescue and Sir Arthur Penrose, came rushing into the hall, their faces pale, speaking in hurried whispers, unaware of the prying ears that lined the walls. "Please, it was so ghastly," Emily lamented, clutching her lace handkerchief as if it could soothe her frayed nerves. "Take a deep breath," Sir Arthur instructed, his voice steady yet tinged with urgency. "We don't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily, but we must speak with Lady Ashcombe at once." Miss Marple joined them with an air of quiet authority, her gentle inquisitiveness piqued. "Goodness, what on earth has happened?" she inquired. "Upstairs in the library," Emily whispered dramatically. "Mr. Thorne, he's collapsed. I think he may be dead." A chill traversed the room, but Miss Marple's mind fluttered with curiosity. In barely a moment, she made her excuses and hurried toward the library, where flickering candlelight danced ominously against the walls. As she approached, the ominous figures of Lord Harrison Ashcombe and Lady Constance stood at the threshold, their dignified airs in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding inside. The scene in the library was unsettling. Mr. Thorne lay sprawled on the oriental carpet, his handsome face twisted in a final grimace. Abandoned books surrounded him, as if he had been brought low by a sudden revelation from one of their pages. The stench of burnt herbs wafted from a nearby inset table, the whimsical tinctures of his love for alchemy now marred by tragedy. "Was he poisoned, do you think?" Lady Constance asked, her voice oddly detached, as though her concern had transformed into an academic curiosity. "Merely investigating the scene." Miss Marple noted the spilled ink from Mr. Thorne's quill, forming a distinct pattern of dark liquid, reminiscent of a spade, a thoroughbred of playing cards. It caught her eye, spinning the wheels of deduction in her mind. "How curious," she remarked, kneeling down. "The ink resembles a clue, concealed in plain sight, much like life itself." "Enough with the riddles, Miss Marple," Lord Harrison barked, his composure starting to unravel beneath the weight of unease. "We need a doctor." "Or a reverend," she suggested quietly, "for a confession may soon enlighten darkened hearts in this room." The gathered guests looked at her incredulously before the sound of racing footsteps interrupted the brewing storm of whispers. The local doctor had arrived, breathless and prepared to deliver both aid and ill news. He knelt beside Mr. Thorne, checking for signs of life, only to rise moments later, graven and somber. "I'm afraid he's gone," he announced gravely. "Too late." A collective sigh of desperation echoed through the chamber. Lady Constance pressed a hand to her heart as if to shield it from the weight of her grief. Yet Miss Marple couldn't shake the nagging notion that sorrow danced with an undercurrent of pretense, a smokescreen woven by motives too intricate for her liking. While the guests clustered around the fallen gentleman in shock, she cast her gaze around the room, scanning their faces. Sir Arthur's brow was furrowed, worry etched into his features. Emily's eyes darted nervously, her hands trembling. Only Lady Constance held her composure tightly, as though fear were merely an unwelcome guest she could dismiss at will. Then, as if conjured by the foreboding shadows of the room, a letter fluttered to the ground, having slipped from the pages of an open book atop the nearby desk. The name Helen, scribbled in hurried script, caught Miss Marple's keen eyes. "It seems rather curious for a lady of Mr. Thorne's refinement," Miss Marple said softly, picking up the note and examining the handwriting. "Please, not write. Now," Lord Harrison interjected sharply. "He's dead, and a doctor is already examining him. It's practical to leave matters for morning." "I dare say," Miss Marple replied, undeterred, "but I find myself compelled to wonder, what does tread lightly mean in this context, and who is Helen?" "I'll take that letter, if it's truly of no interest to you, Miss Marple," Lady Constance offered, her cold smile faltering. "After all, it has nothing to do with us now, does it?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple ventured notes of steel threading her dulcet tone. Yet, Helen could indeed hold the key to uncovering the man lying cold on this floor. The exhausted guests scattered about the room murmured, exchanging suspicious glances, and something shifted in the atmosphere. A hidden distance, an entangled web of secrets spun behind somber gazes. Miss Marple sensed the undercurrents of deception swirling among them. The guests, no longer mere companions, but potential suspects. Yet before she could dissect their expressions further, a soft knock echoed from the manor's massive door, leading her to ponder. A new guest, or perhaps a revelation awaiting like the storm outside. Her heart raced as she realized fiery embers danced in the gathering dark. Who could that be? Emily asked, her pulse quickening. It might be that another truth beckons us forth, Miss Marple murmured, stepping toward the door, her mind ablaze with anticipation. Shall we see who arrives in this home of glimmering intent? She opened the door. The shadowy figure that stood silhouetted against the night held promises of both danger and discovery, a catalyst to unravel the true mystery of Mr. Thorne's demise. With one sweep of the door, the evening promised revelations that could change everything. Chapter 3. The Shadow of a Puzzling Past. The rain fell in relentless sheets, slashing against the cobbled streets of St. Mary Mead, where the shadows clung to every corner like a guilty secret. Miss Marple, comfortably ensconced in her armchair by the hearth, glanced out of the window, peering into the tempest. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered the night before, when they'd found the lifeless body of Mr. Harris, the local historian, sprawled across the floor of his study. He had attempted to confide in her just hours before his untimely demise, but the full weight of his revelation remained tantalizingly out of reach. It was the key to a puzzle she was determined to solve. Just as she resumed her knitting, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed on the wet pavement outside. It was Miss Lucinda Penrose, her neighbor, a woman in her 50s, with a penchant for gossip and an eye for detail. Miss Penrose was drenched, her auburn hair plastered against her forehead. As she stepped inside, the warmth enveloped her, and she shook off her cloak, sending rivulets of water cascading to the floor. "Miss Marple," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with urgency, "you won't believe what I've just discovered." Miss Marple raised her brows, interest piqued. "Do tell, Lucinda. Is it something we are to share over a cup of tea, or is it more alarming?" "It's about Mr. Harris and that peculiar manuscript he mentioned before." Lucinda trailed off, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I went to the library today, you see. I had a feeling there might be something amiss." As Lucinda spoke, Miss Marple's mind raced. The library was an archive of secrets, its dusty shelves housing volumes that had long since forgotten their spine. She could almost see the cobwebs gripping the spine of an old book, hiding the ghosts of past mistakes. "There was talk amongst the staff of Mr. Harris's strange behavior lately," continued Lucinda. "They overheard him arguing with a stranger, a man they described as dark and brooding, with eyes like a wolf waiting for its prey." "Interesting," Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing mid-stitch. "What do you think they argued about?" "Perhaps that manuscript," Lucinda suggested. "They said he had uncovered something shocking, something serious enough to make someone desperate." The flickering flames cast eerie shadows across Miss Marple's face. She stilled for a moment, thinking of the strange artifacts Mr. Harris had collected over the years, all tied to a town whose history was steeped in rumors and whispers. "Did they mention what this stranger looked like?" she queried. her voice steady. "Only that he was familiar to some," Lucinda replied, her brow furrowing. "A man from Mr. Harris's past, or so they said. Little did I know, I am acquainted with a part of that past." A cloud of disbelief drifted over Miss Marple. "You don't mean to say you know Mr. Harris's mysterious interlocutor?" "Not directly, but I often saw a gentleman of that description at the local pub. His name is Mr. Blackwood. I remember hearing he had dated Mr. Harris's sister decades ago. They were young lovers before she mysteriously disappeared." "Disappeared?" Miss Marple repeated. "Such stories do carry weight in the fabric of the past, don't they? Mr. Harris was the last living relative who cared about her fate. I wonder—" Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. A carriage drew up, splashing muddy water across the curb. Moments later, Inspector Craddock burst through the door, shaking off his dripping coat, a set of papers clutched in his hand. His usual composure seemed ruffled, and he glanced between the two women with urgency that signaled importance. "Miss Marple, Miss Penrose," he huffed, catching his breath. "I need to speak with you both. We found something at the scene of Mr. Harris's death." Miss Marple's heart raced. "What is it, Inspector?" "It's a letter, a correspondence," he replied, producing the paper. "Not from Mr. Harris, but addressed to him. You'll see the name scribbled at the top, Doris Montgomery, the very name that belongs to his sister." Lucinda gasped. "But she's been missing for decades. How could he have received anything from her?" "I suspect it brings forth the dance of shadows lurking in our quaint little village," Craddock replied, his brow furrowed. "And as it turns out, Miss Montgomery may not be as lost as we thought." Miss Marple leaned forward, her instincts sharpening. "What do we know of the contents, Inspector?" "The letter is cryptic. A promise, it claims, for a reunion, but it's signed in a manner that suggests someone else's hand," he continued, glancing between them. "I'll need your sharp eyes to decipher this. I sense there are deeper ties connected to it, a sinister web." "It's clear we are tracing the shadows of a puzzling past," Miss Marple said slowly, her mind racing as she locked gazes with Lucinda. As they leaned closer to inspect the letter, the flicker of lightning outside momentarily highlighted a dark figure lurking at the edge of the window's glow. With a gasp, everyone turned, but the figure melted away into the cloak of darkness. "There's more at play here than we realize," Miss Marple muttered, determined, "and I have a feeling we aren't the only ones intrigued by Mr. Harris's secrets." The rain drummed on the roof, a relentless rhythm, as the three figures huddled together, standing precariously on the edge of an enigma, with a profound realization settling heavily in the air. Whatever dangers awaited, they were nestled within the folds of the letter and the past it unveiled. How did it connect to the disappearance of Miss Montgomery? And more pressing still, who had been watching, waiting from the shadows? The thunder cracked, but the incessant rain continued its mournful symphony as Miss Marple prepared to chase down the trails of the past, sensing mysteries that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 4. The Will That Was Never Signed. The rain lashed against the tall, stained glass windows of Charnley Manor, turning the grounds outside into a murky, silver haze. A chill wind howled through the trees, groaning their branches in complaint, as if the ancient oaks were whispering secrets to one another. Amid the storm, the dashing silhouette of Miss Marple, framed by the flickering candlelight in the drawing-room, cast an ominous aura. She had hardly batted an eyelid at the weather. Instead, she held the room captive with her sharp gaze. Her knitting paused in her lap as she absorbed the palpable tension in the air. Before I can help you, dear Mr. Kilville, I must see the document that has brought us all here, she said, her voice a gentle but commanding inquiry directed at the estate's solicitor, who stood shaking with a mixture of cold and apprehension. Kilville moved forward, his hands trembling as he produced a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket. This is the last will of Reginald Yate, the deceased, he stuttered, his eyes darting nervously towards the other occupants of the room. However, I regret to inform you there is a complication. The will was never signed. Muriel Yate, Reginald's widow, gasped sharply, her wide eyes brimming with distress, matching the storm raging outside. What do you mean, never signed? It cannot be. We drew it up a fortnight before. Her voice faltered. A glint of anguish crossed her face, and it became clear that the weight of her late husband's affairs cut deeper than mere financial loss. Miss Marple leaned forward in her chair, her knitting momentarily forgotten. A fortnight before his untimely death, you say? She studied Muriel, observing the crease in her brow, the tremor of her hand as it moved to cover her mouth. Did he express any reservations about the will? None, Muriel whispered, her face pale. He spoke as if it were an amicable arrangement. He was fond of the idea of leaving it all, to me, the house and the vineyards. Except for that other piece of land, Kilville interjected awkwardly. Yes, the parcel that belonged to the Wallington estate, Muriel confirmed sharply, her gaze now focused on Kilville, flush with irritation. A mere trifle, as Reginald had oft stated. In that moment, Miss Marple observed the flicker of defiance in Kilville's eyes when he said, "Though I will remind you that your late husband was far from prudent in his dealings. The Wallington, necessary for a complete transfer of inheritance, required signatures from both owner and the estate's heirs. It was a complex business." Muriel's fury shone through once more. He managed it splendidly, until her lips pressed together, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air, thickening the tension. The word "until" echoed ominously, weaving doubt into the tight-knit group gathered in the drawing room. Miss Marple allowed silence to envelop the room, absorbing the nuances of their conversation. Reginald Yates' sudden passing had thrown everything into chaos, and yet the true nature of their familial discord remained a riddle wrapped within a mystery. "Ah, Miss Marple, you must have some insight into this tangled web," piped up Bertie Ashcombe, a cousin of Reginald's who had shown a remarkable lack of regard toward decorum as he sat sprawled across a chair. "Perhaps this was all part of the foul play. I've wagered against it, but you know how sinister families can become. Tensions were at an all-time high, yes, during the game of bridge." He snickered nervously, trying to deflect his own fear. "There's a difference between familial trouble and outright conspiracy," Marple countered, her delicate brow furrowed. "Murder is not always born from a singular grudge. It may simply arise from a desperate need." Just as the words left her lips, a loud crack of thunder shook the rafters, causing Muriel to flinch. The candle flames flickered wildly, then steadied, casting a sharp light across the room, illuminating a portrait of Reginald with a sly expression born of hidden secrets. Suddenly, Sylvia Bell, a close friend of Muriel's, who had been quiet, stood up, her face resolute yet conflicted. "Reginald made an adjustment the night of the storm, before his death. Send me to fetch that notebook. I shall prove it. He was writing something that evening." She swayed slightly, but maintained an air of purpose. Miss Marple sensed deeper undercurrents swirling in Sylvia's declaration. "An adjustment you've never mentioned before. Could you recall the precise nature of this writing? Sylvia's face paled. It was his handwriting, but perhaps it was merely thoughts on a business meeting with Kilville, or perhaps a new will. Or perhaps something more sinister, Marple mused, her sharp intellect connecting the seams of the mystery with unseen threads. Would it not be prudent for us to see that notebook? To what end? Muriel sneered, pushing back her hair in frustration. Surely these matters can only lead to further disillusionment. Miss Marple stood, her resolve firm. My dear Muriel, the moment they uncover this document may very well hold the key to what happened the night Reginald died. She stepped toward the door but hesitated, turning back to the group, her expression growing somber. In the realm of wills and secrets, one must tread with caution, for the answers might coil back to ensnare us. Just then, with a chilling creak, the door opened slightly, revealing the darkened hallway beyond. The shadows seemed to drip with uncertainty, and a gust of wind blew past them, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and perhaps hidden truths. Miss Marple stepped closer to the door, her heartbeat echoing in synchrony with the distant thunder rumbling outside. There, lying against the farthest wall, was a peculiar object, a small, blue leather notebook, slightly ajar, heartlessly abandoned. Its very presence beckoned mystery, the retina of a stormy night, unfurling yet another layer to the increasing treachery enveloping Charnley Manor. The storm had gathered intensity, but so too had the unsettling revelations. As Miss Marple reached for the notebook, feeling the collective breaths of those behind her hitch in anticipation. In that moment, silence reigned, and uncertainty hung like the humid air before a tempest. The chapter ended, cloaked in the unsolved shades of human desire and desperation, marking yet another turn in a tale that darkened with every signature yet to be penned. Chapter 5. The Creeping Fears of Rosewood. The air was thick with tension as the clock struck midnight in the sprawling manor of Rosewood. Rain hammered the windows, creating a soundtrack of ominous drumming that reverberated through the silent halls. Miss Marple, perched in her usual chair by the fire, was leafing through a tattered old book when a blood-curdling scream shattered the quiet. Clutching the book to her chest, she sprang up, propelled by the frantic cries emanating from the upper floors. The scream seemed to echo the creeping fears that had begun to envelop Rosewood ever since the mysterious death of Lady Agnes Hawke, an esteemed member of the local gentry. She had not only been a victim of circumstance, whispers of lingering secrets and buried grudges had begun to surface amongst the villagers, and tonight those murky waters threatened to swallow them whole. Miss Marple hurried up the creaking staircase, every step a reminder of the manse's age and the tales it could tell. At the end of the corridor she found Sir Edward Hawke, his face a mask of horror, peering into the ornately decorated drawing-room. "Miss Marple, it's Gerald. He's—" Before he could finish, she bounded past him into the room, bracing herself for the whirring of mad suspicion that would likely follow. There, sprawled on the newly polished floor, lay Gerald Lansing, the local historian who had been collaborating with Lady Agnes on her memoirs. He was now lifeless, his eyes wide open in a silent scream. His face was pallid under the opulent chandelier, casting elongated shadows that danced menacingly against the walls. "Do not touch anything, Sir Edward," Miss Marple instructed, her voice steady despite the tumultuous storm brewing inside her. She knelt beside Gerald's body, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of struggle. There were none, only the faintest hint of his ink-stained fingers resting uselessly by his side. This particular detail tugged at the edges of her mind like a thread waiting to be pulled. Who could have done this? Sir Edward's voice trembled as he leaned back against a piece of furniture that threatened to splinter under his weight. Miss Marple's gaze settled on a loose sheet of paper near Gerald's hand. Carefully, she lifted it, her brow furrowing, as she read a hastily scrawled note. "The truth lies buried beneath the oak. Time reveals all." With her mind racing, Miss Marple sensed something broader, a web of fears and intentions snaring each of the manor's inhabitants. As Sir Edward fretted, she looked at him intently. Gerald had been researching something significant, hadn't he? Newly uncovered family secrets. Edward frowned, stroking his moustache, a common habit she had observed. He had hinted at a scandal long concealed. Lady Agnes, but his sentence trailed into silence, leaving a precipice of dreadful suspicion in the air. The gravity of Gerald's research began to shine light on the darker motivations of the assembled cast of characters haunting the manor. The plasticized uniforms of the local police arrived, blundering about in their muddy boots with no respect for the jessamine carpet. Miss Marple moved to the window, peering through the heavy rain and the hissing wind, as if it might provide answers obscured by the tempest. That oak tree, which Gerald's note hinted at, was the same tree under which Lady Agnes had fallen. What truths hid beneath its gnarled roots? Suddenly, there was a soft knock upon the door. Miss Marple turned to find Beatrice, Lady Agnes's maid, making her way into the drawing room, her demeanor oddly calm amid the chaos. The maid's eyes darted nervously, but there was a glint of something hard in her brow. I overheard too much," she stammered, her voice quavering. "Miss Marple, you must believe me. There's something wrong here." "Precisely what did you hear, Beatrice?" Miss Marple's tone remained calm, urging the maid gently to divulge the secrets she scarcely understood herself. Beatrice bit her lip, her eyes downcast. "Lady Agnes had an argument with a man the night before she died. She was terrified, but I couldn't hear much. Just words like legacy and the truth must remain hidden. I thought it was a deception of sorts, a melodrama." Her voice trembled again, revealing layers of guilt and fear. A light of realization flickered in Miss Marple's mind. The oak, the legacy, the hidden truth, the web tightened around the characters entangled within this stormy narrative. And what did Gerald know about that? He was probably uncovering those secrets, Beatrice replied. "We all feared that. It could ruin the family, you see." Perching her hand on Miss Marple's shoulder, Beatrice suddenly gasped, her eyes widening. "There's someone else who has a stake in this, isn't there?" she whispered, her voice dropping as the atmosphere grew heavier with dread. Gerald was not only digging up the past, but stirring up resentment. Miss Marple's mind raced, with possibilities. Amid family secrets and buried legacies, it was becoming clearer that someone among them was willing to kill for the truth. Was it the loyal servant? Or perhaps Sir Edward himself, who, under the pretense of grief, concealed a darker urgency? As the rain lashed against the manor, Miss Marple knew she was standing on the precipice of discovery. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the room into darkness momentarily before returning. A chilling thought struck her. What if the killer was closer than she had anticipated? What if the lurking shadow didn't just await justice? What if it awaited her? Within that momentary fracture of light and dark, Miss Marple resolved to unearth the secrets lurking beneath the oak, knowing time was of the essence. A storm was brewing, both outside in the tempest and inside the hearts of those she had come to know. And with each tick of the clock, another shoe was destined to drop. The rain intensified, drumming its own foreboding rhythm against the roof, and Miss Marple knew this was just the beginning. She could hear the deepened breaths of the anxious crowd gathered. A final mystery was awaiting revelation, and suddenly the drawing-room door creaked open once more, heralding an unexpected figure silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. A figure Miss Marple recognized all too well, drenched in shadows and secrets alive in their eyes. The chapter closed with a lingering question as a new shape stepped across the threshold. Who would reveal what was buried beneath the oak tree, and at what cost? Chapter 6. The Vanishing Suspect. The rain fell in heavy sheets against the window panes of the old rectory, each drop echoing a dull thud around the dimly lit room. Miss Marple, cozy in her well-worn armchair, peered through the smudged glass as the wind howled like a banshee, carrying with it an air of foreboding. The village of St. Mary Mead lay ghostly and monochrome in the storm, its cobbled streets and gabled rooftops rendered sinister by the thunderous boom of nature. She set down her knitting, her mind racing not with thoughts of stitches, but of the day's unsettling events. Just after tea, the local constable had barged into her haven, a damp and wind-battered figure, his complexion as pale as the parchment he clutched in his fingers. "Miss Marple, a most grievous situation has arisen. Mr. Maximilian Faraday has gone missing," he gasped, the words tumbling from his lips like rain off a broken eave. Just yesterday, he witnessed the most extraordinary incident. Mr. Rowley claiming he saw something most suspicious down by the old chapel. Marple's eyes lit up with intrigue. In recent weeks, the small village had been rife with rumors, some more fanciful than others, surrounding the wealthy Rowley family whose fortunes had been intertwined with a series of unfortunate incidents. The most damning of these had been the late Lady Rowley's mysterious demise, overshadowed by whispers of betrayal and greed. "Maximilian, you say? A fine gentleman, with a keen eye," she murmured, her mind sifting through the pieces of the puzzle that lay scattered about her thoughts. "He mustn't simply have vanished. There's always something, an explanation. Tell me precisely what he saw." The constable fidgeted, nervously twisting the brim of his cap. He said he saw Mr. Rowley himself at the chapel holding a peculiar object. When he tried to inquire further, Mr. Rowley turned pale and fled. That night, Maximilian claimed he would confront him about it. "Did he say what this object was?" Marple's heart raced as possibilities unfolded before her. He shook his head, worry creasing his brow. "All I know, Miss Marple, is that whatever it was seemed to shake him to his core. This morning, when I looked for Mr. Faraday, no one had seen him since last evening." Marple's mind raced through a series of questions. Why would Maximilian approach Rowley? What was running through the mind of the suspicious heir, a man known for his aloof demeanor and secrets as dark as the sky outside? Rain continued to batter against the windows, a vicious symphony accompanying her thoughts. "Ah, Constable, do you recall the exact words Maximilian used?" she probed, leaning forward. The manner in which he described Rowley could be enlightening. The constable wrinkled his forehead in concentration. "He mentioned something like burdened by a sin," he recalled slowly, the words rolling out with reluctance as if he feared unearthing old graves. It seemed Mr. Faraday was convinced that Mr. Rowley had a hand in critical affairs of the late lady. Marple tapped her fingers against her chin. That was it. What could that burden have been? The pieces danced just out of reach, like figures veiled in shadow. "Surely you must take me to the chapel," she commanded, the determination in her voice startling the young constable. He hesitated, but eventually nodded, the gravity of the situation setting his jaw. Together, they stepped into the tumultuous night. The world, washed afresh in rain, but steeped in a growing darkness. The chapel stood as a lonely sentinel on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, its ancient stones slick with moisture, each corner telling tales of watchful patience. Shadows danced amidst the flicker of the constable's lantern as Marple's keen eyes darted around. She noticed footprints, clearly defined, then muddied and indistinct nearby. Her chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and dread. "Constable, look here." She knelt down, indicating a cluster of uneven impressions just beyond the threshold. "Someone has walked in, but left in a hurry." "Likely Mr. Faraday," he suggested, furrowing his brow as he examined the evidence. "Or perhaps Mr. Rowley," she countered, feeling the tug of intuition pull her further into the mystery. "He may have returned here after their encounter, perhaps to dispose of whatever it was that terrified him." As they inspected closer, Marple noticed a glint yellowing amongst the debris. Her hands trembled slightly as she uncovered a gilded locket, shimmering like a secret waiting to escape its confines. Upon opening it, a faded photograph of Lady Rowley smiled back at her, vulnerable but exquisite. Inside the locket, an inscribed message read, "To my dearest Edward, our bonds shall never be broken. C. Constantine." The constable's brow knitted together, confusion flooding his expression. "You think it's him, the late Lord Rowley?" "No," Marple murmured, her sharp mind connecting the dots. "I suspect this to be evidence of Rowley's entanglement with someone who wished to remain hidden. But why would Mr. Faraday take this from Rowley? Ah, and what a folly that would be!" Suddenly, a noise erupted from the darkness surrounding them, a voice calling out in distress. "No, no, leave me be!" Before she could react, a shadow darted from behind the chapel, its figure merging with the downpour. Panic twisted inside Miss Marple as she recognized that anguished cry. "Constable, after him," she cried, the thrilling urgency revitalizing her spirit. They raced through the storm, heartbeats amplified by fear and resolve. But the figure slipped away like a wisp of smoke, leaving nothing but swirling clouds of rain and uncertainty behind. The chase had revealed another layer to the murky veils already draping over St. Mary Mead. Whoever the fleeing figure was, and whoever was truly to blame for orchestrating the web of deceit, could now hide half as well as the secrets they kept. As they stood panting in the rain, Miss Marple's gaze traveled back to the locket clasped in her palm. The tangled threads of love, betrayal, and fear began to weave close in her mind, her instincts heightened by the storm's fury. Just who had vanished? Maximilian Faraday or Edward Rowley? And what truth lay buried beneath the locket's facade? In the shadow of the chapel, the ache of resolution beckoned ever closer, but as the rain continued to hiss and churn, she could feel the sinister undercurrents silkily drawing tighter around her as she wondered, what would she uncover next? Chapter 7. A Whisper from the Dead. The rain drummed insistently on the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, painting the village in a slick sheen as the grey twilight deepened. The wind howled like a sorrowful ghost, tugging at the corners of the old manor, which loomed like a shadow just beyond the village square. Miss Jane Marple stood at her window, peering out at the tumultuous night, her mind racing after the troubling events of the past few days. A distinct unease settled deep within her. A whisper from the dead seemed to echo with every raindrop. Moments earlier, the local constable, Sergeant Craddock, had knocked spiritedly at her door, clutching an envelope that contained a fragment of a letter torn from a diary. It was found at the foot of the old elm, he had breathlessly stated, eyes darting with a blend of excitement and fear. It seems to have belonged to Eleanor Ogden. But Miss Marple, that's not all. He'd hesitated, swallowing hard. Speak plainly, Sergeant. She had insisted, her heart quickening with anticipation and dread. The words, Miss Marple, they were... I mean to say they might provide us a clue linked to the recent tragedy involving Barnaby Teagle. They're unsettling. He laid the letter across her kitchen table, the corners damp from the rain. Now, the dark envelope lay there like a snake, waiting to strike. Miss Marple flipped it open and withdrew the half-burned pages, their edges singed as if they'd barely escaped a fire. The withered paper bore Eleanor's elegant handwriting, yet the words hinted at a kind of desperation. The truth stirs beneath the roots. It would be best not to dig too deep, for the whisper of the dead can raise the most restless spirits. Miss Marple frowned, her mind racing. Barnaby had indeed been found dead, a deep wound on his forehead from a fall that seemed far too calculated for mere chance. She recalled his intriguing connection to the Ogden estate, a witness to the scandal that had echoed through the village like a clarion call. But what could it all mean? Suddenly, the clock chimed the hour, and she was pulled from her thoughts. With the storm persisting, she felt a heaviness in the air, as if the very house was enveloped in sorrow. Outside, a hooded figure darted past in flickering shadow. It was Eleanor's brother, Martin Ogden, a reclusive poet who had distanced himself from the family's malicious secrets. But he had never been far from suspicion, especially regarding Barnaby's death. With her apron still wrapped around her, Miss Marple rushed to the front door, peering through the rain-smeared glass to catch a glimpse of Martin, his back hunched against the pelting rain. She hesitated for a moment, but the notion of a hasty pursuit through the deluge snapped her resolve. Grabbing her coat, she stepped out, the cool, moisture-soaked air curling around her like an insistent hand. "Mr. Ogden," she called, her voice straining against the wind, and he turned sharply, his eyes wide with surprise. "Miss Marple," he shouted back over the storm. I'm just taking a stroll. An evening's walk helps the mind." "A walk in this weather, dear man? You mustn't be so reckless," she said, forcing a light tone despite their tense conversation. "Do you perhaps have something troubling your heart?" He hesitated, rain pouring off his crooked hat, his fingers twitching anxiously. The village has grown too talkative of late. Rumors concerning Barnaby. It's worse than mere gossip. One becomes fearful of shadows. Miss Marple studied him. Was he alarmed out of genuine concern, or was he concealing something darker? "Shadows can betray," she replied carefully. "What do you know about those whispers that follow us?" Martin's expression sharpened, his eyes narrowing against the moody night. "Perhaps I know that the past is better left buried, much like my sister. Do you think I wouldn't do anything to shield her memory from such vile recounts? Eleanor is not the only spectre haunting us, is she?" Miss Marple pressed, trying to ignore the icy fingers curling up her spine. "There is something beneath the roots of this tragedy, something waiting to be uncovered." Before he could respond, the sound of splashing footsteps interrupted them. Constable Craddock ambled toward them, panting vivaciously. "Miss Marple, there's news. We found more fragments of Eleanor's belongings near the elm." "What sort of belongings?" she asked, urgency thrumming through her. His expression was grave, and he held out grimy, palm-sized pieces of a locket, its gold fraying at the edges. "It belonged to Eleanor. There's a picture inside of Barnaby Teagle." A chill ran through Miss Marple as she glanced at Martin, who blanched beneath the rain, his mouth a thin line of tension. "I didn't know," he stammered, a frown twisting his features. "Didn't know what, Mr. Ogden?" Miss Marple pressed, eyes narrowing. The atmosphere thickened, an unspoken accusation trembling in the air, crackling like static. She had hidden secrets, perhaps some sort of... But before he could finish, a loud crack of thunder silenced him, cutting through the tension like a blade. Ceasing their discourse, the three stood in the tumultuous storm, shrouded in mystery. Miss Marple's heart raced, realizing the depths of the clues swirling like a dark fog around them. The locket, the diary fragment, Martin's fear, were they mere coincidences or pieces of a nefarious puzzle? As the rain fell, with renewed anger, she knew she teetered on the precipice of something both sinister and revealing. "What else don't we know?" she wondered aloud, her gaze shifting from the fragments to Martin's anxious visage. But as she turned, a low whisper echoed around her, as if the very dead invoked their message anew. The unease settled heavier in her heart as the pieces began to gather into an ominous picture. And just as Martin opened his mouth to speak, a figure emerged from the shadows, crashing through the brambles, shouting a name in the storm until the rain carried it away. "Help! It's Eleanor!" And with that unimaginable proclamation, the darkness deepened, tethering Miss Marple to a path of startling revelations. Only one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. Chapter 8. The Fragile Threads of Deceit. The timid patter of raindrops against the window pane intensified, forming an ominous symphony punctuated by distant rumblings of thunder. In the heart of the laurel-clad Cresswell Manor, Miss Marple stood aloof, her attention affixed on the direction from whence the chilling scent of cold metal wafted. With a practiced eye, she studied the murky shadows within the drawing-room, a long, empty expanse adorned with faded photographs and antique curiosities that whispered secrets of days long past. Little did she know, woven into the intricate tapestry of familial history were fragile threads of deceit that would soon unravel in her presence. A sudden crash echoed from the upper floor, shattering the oppressive silence. Skittish, Miss Marple eased her way up the creaking staircase, her mind racing with possibilities. Each step brought forth memories of her earlier conversations from that fateful dinner. The 5 guests of Lord Cresswell, who had gathered to celebrate the heir's return from an extended tour abroad, each held an unspoken motive. At that moment, she registered with a start. None of the murderers had yet been accounted for, especially not since Lord Cresswell's treacherous fall from grace the very next morning. Reaching the hall, she noticed the door to the library ajar, the flickering glow of a candle spilling out like a beacon of mystery. Pushing the door gently, she found herself engulfed in a scene both startling and ghastly. Eliza Betts, the young governess, sprawled lifeless on the rich, worn carpet, her delicate features eerily serene in death. A fragile silver locket glimmered next to her, its chain twisted and broken, like the grim fate that had sought her out. "Oh, dear me," Miss Marple murmured to herself, instinctively kneeling beside the body. The locket, gently engraved with the letters J.B., was a curious detail that gripped her attention. She recalled Eliza's soft voice reciting poetry to the children, though she had barely glimpsed the girls' relationships. Discreet yet observant, she knew little of the depths concealed beneath that polished facade. The blend of tender features and disillusion indicated that Eliza had possessed dreams bound by the constraints of her social station. Outside, the rain lashed violently against the window, almost as if it whispered secrets it could not hold any longer. A mysterious rustle reverberated from within the chaotic depths of Miss Marple's mind. The threads binding the present to the past began to weave themselves anew. A sudden noise from the hallway diverted her attention. Slipping silently to the door, she peered out into the dimly lit corridor where a familiar figure emerged. It was Jonathan Betts, Eliza's older brother and a local artist, whose melancholy air often suggested deeper sorrows. His ashen complexion was a mask for what lay beneath. Guilt, perhaps, or something more ominous. He took no notice of Miss Marple as he entered the library, but she caught the fleeting flicker of concern in his eyes as he registered Eliza's demise. "Jonathan, you mustn't," she called gently, causing him to whirl around. The shock blossomed on his face while she continued, "We mustn't disturb the scene. This is a matter for the authorities." "But I must find out what has happened," he faltered, the frantic edge to his voice blending desperation with fear. "She had just confided in me, a secret she believed could endanger us all." A bond forged through familial loyalty dulled his despair for an instant, as Miss Marple took a deliberate step closer. "And what secret might that be, dear boy?" "Something about a scandal within the family." His voice quivered with emotion. Eliza believed she was being pursued for knowledge that could destroy Cresswell's entire legacy. Miss Marple widened her eyes, suddenly aware of the scandalous threads weaving through the tapestry of the Cresswell lineage. Was it possible that Lord Cresswell's untimely death and Eliza's demise were connected? She asked with deliberation, "And what of this locket? It bears the initials J.B. Yours, perhaps?" "Mine," he exclaimed, unsteadily advancing on the locket as if it were a serpent ready to strike. "I gave it to her when she started working here as a gesture of goodwill, but she had grown so fearful, convinced that someone was watching her, watching us." "Indeed," Miss Marple mused, adjusting her spectacles with a knowing demeanor. "Perhaps our girl was not merely a victim of circumstance, but hold a perilous insight that led to her untimely death. But tell me, dear chap, why would someone wish to silence her?" "I don't know." He fell to his knees, despair consuming him. The investigation gleamed with innumerable possibilities as thunder cracked outside, a harsh reminder of nature's ferocity. Misguided accusations and ailments of the heart filled the air as she sensed a web tightening around each occupant of Cresswell Manor. They were all naught but fragile threads, gilded with deceit. With urgency in her eyes and determination coursing through her mind, Miss Marple turned her attention to the fireplace. In its corner lay not merely ruins of last night's embers, but a crumpled parchment, barely distinguishable amongst the ashes. Drawing near, she reached for the charred edges of the paper, revealing a portion of an inked note. Anguished, it appeared to be half-formed proclamations of treasonous intent. As her heart raced, she turned her gaze back to Jonathan, filled with the suspicions that began to weave their own deadly conclusions. Who among the Cresswells could bear such past grievances? What revelations awaited the moment that this paper spoke fully? For with every thread pulled, The tapestry of deceit began to unravel, encompassing more than she could have ever anticipated. Miss Marple's mind surged with possibilities and precarious truths as she made a fateful decision to confront the clandestine identities shrouded in the midnight shadows of Cresswell Manor. Where one life had been extinguished, many others lingered on the brink, and as she raised her chin with resolve, she was determined to shine a light through the tangled darkness. The rain surged, mingling with the ghost of Eliza's presence. With a swift motion, Miss Marple tucked the notes safely in her pocket, ready to uncover a clandestine world rife with treachery before anyone else became ensnared by the fragile threads of deceit. Chapter 9. The Final Trap at Midnight. The relentless rain thrashed against the leaded windows of the manor house, a dim glimmer of moonlight escaping through the clouds to dance on the wooden floorboards. The clock in the hall chimed ominously, announcing the midnight hour. With each reverberation of its bells, the air grew thicker with tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The muddled whispers of London Underground, the sound of sporadic thunder, and the creaking of old hinges combined into a symphony of suspense. Miss Marple sat resolutely in the drawing-room, her attentive eyes darting between the various police reports and correspondence laid across the walnut table. The dread of the unsolved murders, entwined in the very fabric of this village, lingered like a shadow. Just the previous afternoon, the police had found a swathe of blood near the footpath leading from the glen, linked to the mysterious disappearance of Elsie Pryor, the shopkeeper's daughter. Elsie had been in possession of a peculiar locket, reportedly holding a secret that someone was desperate to keep concealed. The thudding of footsteps reached her ears. It was Detective Inspector Craddock, his brow furrowed in concentration as he entered. "Miss Marple, I dare say this rain is a harbinger of something more than just a mere storm," he remarked, wiping the rainwater from his hat. Miss Marple regarded him intently. "Indeed, Inspector, the air feels charged, doesn't it? There's an undercurrent of urgency tonight, far beyond the downpour." "Quite," he replied, leaning over a piece of paper. "We've received a tip-off that someone plans to meet at the old stone bridge just past midnight. They mentioned a reveal. It might have something to do with Elsie." "Intriguing. But who would dare show themselves in such dismal conditions?" Miss Marple mused, intrigued. "Might I suggest we gather a few officers and investigate quietly?" Craddock nodded, his weariness momentarily replaced by determination. He gestured for her to follow as they made their way through the chilly corridors, the manor seemingly alive with the echoes of its past. As they reached the entrance, the door creaked open to reveal the sharp, compelling outline of a figure cloaked in shadows just beyond the threshold. It was Mr. Frederick Henley, the local solicitor, whose demeanor fluctuated between anxiety and agitation. "Good heavens, Mr. Henley, what brings you here at such an hour?" Miss Marple inquired, a flicker of surprise lighting her features. I've come with an urgent message," he panted, his breath visible in the cold air. "I heard talk that a confrontation is imminent tonight. Someone is set to uncover the truth about Elsie's locket. It's something very dear to a Mr. Bramwell." "Mr. Bramwell, you say?" Craddock interjected, with a keen glimmer in his eyes. "The reclusive artist in the village?" "Exactly," Henley affirmed, clutching his hat nervously. "Elsie was his muse, but the locket, it contains far more than just sentimental value. I fear for her safety." "Then we shan't waste another moment," Miss Marple urged, already moving towards the door. Thunder rumbled ominously above, as if reflecting the dread mounting within them. The three of them set out into the storm, hearts synchronized in purpose. As they approached the bridge, the landscape transformed. The fluttering of leaves rustled in the rising wind, and the sound of rushing water created a haunting melody beneath the canopy of downpour. The light from their lanterns pierced the night, swaying and flickering as if hesitant to confront the shadows ahead. Suddenly, a figure emerged along the path, constricted by the rain. It was long and slender, their silhouette hardly distinguishable against the murky background. "Bramwell," Miss Marple called, and the figure halted, turning sharply their way. The artist stepped into the illumination, his face etched with fear. "You must not have come. They're coming for me." "Who?" Craddock demanded, brandishing his own lantern. "They should not know of my connection to the locket, that I possess one of its keys." He stammered before a streak of lightning illuminated his expression, a mix of desperation and guilt. Miss Marple's thoughts whirled like the tempest around them. "The locket holds some significance to you, then?" "It does," he gasped, his voice cracking under the weight of his disclosure. "It reveals a secret, a treasure lost, more valuable than mere gold. You must understand, Elsie thought she could handle it, but the moment she donned it, it illuminated dark figures of the past." Just then, a sharp crack interrupted the tempest of words, echoing ominously through the still night. From the depths of the woods, two silhouettes emerged, quickly advancing towards them. Craddock, sensing danger, glanced at Marple and whispered urgently, "We need to retreat." But before they could turn back, the figures sped forward and soon revealed themselves to be Jonathan and Philip, the twin brothers who had been suspiciously lingering within the village. "The locket doesn't belong to you, Bramwell," Jonathan shouted, anger lacing his tone. "Hand it over." And then, in the conversation's cacophony, it struck Miss Marple. There was an unsettling connection between their words and the missing pieces of the puzzle surrounding Elsie. As the rain fell heavier, building a dark chorus, something glittered amidst the stones underfoot. She bent down, her fingers grazing a cold metallic object, the locket. Just as realization dawned, the world around her erupted in chaos. A fierce shout echoed, the thunder rolling like a distant war drum, cutting through the clamoring voices. As the rain intensified, shadows closed in. With a surge of clarity, Miss Marple opened the locket, revealing a folded note within, a note that could unravel everything, the final clue to finish a twisted tale of mystery. But before she could grasp its significance, a hand darted out of the shadows. She gasped, the future of the case precariously hanging in the balance. "Stop where you are." As the midnight faded, the trap was set, and the fortune of secrets entwined with every life on the precipice began to unravel in a shocking twist, leaving Miss Marple standing alone in the storm, grappling with the truth that seemed so near, yet so devastatingly far. Chapter 10. The Truth Buried in the Garden. The rain fell relentlessly on the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, casting an ethereal mist around the old stone walls of Miss Marple's cottage. Inside, the warm glow of the fireplace flickered, the crackling of the logs a soft backdrop to her mulling thoughts. Cloistered in her armchair, she had been reviewing her notes on the curious case of the late Sir Cedric Morrel for the better part of the afternoon. His untimely demise, shrouded in mystery, still haunted the villagers, and Miss Marple's sharp mind brimmed with questions longing to be unravelled. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the silence, plunging her into the present. Startled, she set her notes aside and opened the door to find a drenched and breathless Mr. Adcock, the gardener from the Marple estate. His usual composure was masqueraded by an air of panic as he stammered, "Miss Marple, you must come quickly. There's something dreadful in the garden." Intrigued yet cautious, Miss Marple hurried to grab her coat, feeling the tension in Mr. Adcock's demeanour. Together, they traversed the slick cobblestones toward the Marple estate. The grand old manor loomed in the midst of its sprawling garden, which had once been the pride of Sir Cedric's fascinating garden parties. Now, however, it lay drenched under the falling rain, and the atmosphere resonated with an eerie desolation. As they approached the crumbling stone pathways, the wind howled like a restless ghost. Mr. Adcock led her to the vegetable patch, now a muddy expanse, where they stopped beside a hastily dug-up patch. "I was clearing the weeds when I discovered this," he murmured, pointing to the freshly turned earth, disturbed and uneven. Kneeling, Miss Marple brushed the damp soil away carefully, revealing the gleam of a broken wristwatch. It was not merely any timepiece, but one previously worn by Lady Beatrice, Sir Cedric's widow. "This must have been here for quite some time," Miss Marple speculated as she held it gently in the palm of her hand. Mr. Adcock shivered as he looked over his shoulder, the shadows around them deepening as the evening descended. "I hoped it would yield no dark revelation, but what if she—" Miss Marple, ever observant, noticed the shift in his voice and demeanour. His hands trembled, and he avoided her gaze. "You've known Lady Beatrice for years, Mr. Adcock. What would compel you to accompany me here tonight, even in this dreadful weather?" "It's not just the watch, Miss Marple. There have been whispers. The villagers. They talk about the ghost of Sir Cedric roaming the grounds at night. And there's something I've kept to myself. Something about Lady Beatrice." "What was that?" Miss Marple's interest was piqued further. For a heartbeat, Mr. Adcock's resolve crumbled. "She's not the same woman since Sir Cedric's death. I swear, I saw her in the twilight hours, speaking to someone in the shadows. I heard words exchanged." "Spoken to whom?" Miss Marple pressed, her senses sharpening. "I could scarcely make it out," he stated, lowering his voice. "But there's a new man near the village. Rumour says he has a dark past. Lady Beatrice denies it, but I can see that it has taken a toll on her." "Who is this man?" "I cannot say outright, Miss Marple, but—" Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden rustling from the thick hedges nearby. A gasp escaped Miss Marple's lips as both turned sharply. Emerging from the shadows was none other than Lady Beatrice herself, her pale face illuminated by the new-found moonlight piercing through the clouds. "What are you doing here?" she questioned, her tone laced with a mix of anger and fear. "It's utterly inappropriate for you to dig around in my garden. What do you seek?" Miss Marple studied her carefully. Lady Beatrice's finely pressed attire belied the dampness of the night, but there was an uneasiness about her sharp expression. "We have stumbled upon an old watch, Lady Beatrice. Yours, I presume." Her face froze momentarily, a flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossing her features before she regained her composure. "That watch belongs to me, yes, but what could it possibly mean?" "More than you know," Miss Marple replied, the gears of her mind whirring. "Perhaps it leads back to Sir Cedric. Tell me, where were you the evening he died?" Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "You have no right to interrogate me," she asserted, yet there was a slight quiver in her voice that betrayed her confidence. "But I have every right to be curious, my dear," Miss Marple insisted, with an unyielding gaze, especially when the dead seemed to resurface in the garden. The tension hung thick in the air, electrifying the atmosphere as Mr. Adcock took a step back. Lady Beatrice's lips thinned, and for the faintest moment she looked like a trapped animal. "I had nothing to do with it," she hissed. Turning on her heel abruptly, she stalked away, heading back toward the house. "Lady Beatrice," Mr. Adcock called out, but she vanished into the dark corridors of the manor. "Miss Marple," Mr. Adcock's voice trembled. "What does this mean? Will I lose my job over this?" With the broken wristwatch clenched tightly in her fist, Miss Marple's mind raced. The missing pieces were starting to align, yet an unsettling revelation loomed ahead. There was something deeper, shrouded beneath the garden's soil, buried not just in earth, but in secrets, unspeakable truths waiting to be unearthed. As they trudged back toward the manor's shadow, Miss Marple couldn't shake the suspicion growing within her. Perhaps Lady Beatrice had more secrets than careworn grief. She pondered her next move. Would the truth reveal itself in the depths of the garden? To uncover Sir Cedric's secrets, perhaps she would need to dig even deeper. As they reached the manor's doors, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast garden behind them. Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a glint of silver beneath the soil. There was more to be found, and she had the sense it would not be long until the darkness began to yield its truths, if only she could find the right moment to unearth them.